When you think of the ancient world, you might picture a time of mud huts and horse-drawn carts. But between 1600 and 1100 BC, the Mediterranean boasted some of the most dazzling cities ever built. There were palaces carved into cliffs, temples towering above bustling marketplaces, and hulking citadels rising above fertile farmlands. Seafaring kingdoms spread their influence across 3 continents, linked together by an intricate web of trade. Egypt, Anatolia, Greece, Mesopotamia, and Palestine were all ruled by powerful monarchs who enjoyed more wealth and luxury than any of their predecessors. It was a golden age for the ancient world, known as the Late Bronze Age. But around 1200 BCE, the world's first great civilizations suddenly began to unravel. In just a few decades, mighty empires from Greece to Egypt, Mesopotamia to Anatolia collapsed into chaos. Palaces burned, trade routes vanished, and cities that had thrived for centuries were abandoned. The catastrophe is known as the Bronze Age collapse, the first global collapse in human history. The collapse was so profound it left behind gaps in the historical record. The exact timing is uncertain, and many kingdoms fell so thoroughly that scholars knew little about them until the 20th century. When archaeologists uncovered their secrets, we still don't know what caused the collapse or how everyone was connected. But recent discoveries have revealed a complex web of interconnected civilizations that were tied together by trade, war, and cultural exchange. Welcome to my channel. Today, we're going to explore how these civilizations rose and fell, and what we can learn about our own world by understanding what happens when the ancient world almost destroys itself. Let's start with the setting. The Late Bronze Age refers to a period marked by the widespread use of bronze in weapons and tools, which flourished in Eurasia and North Africa from approximately 1600 to 1100 BC. During this era, cities grew dramatically in size, supported by intensive agriculture and long-distance trade. The most powerful forces were the Egyptians, Mycenaeans, Hittites, Kassites, the new kingdom of Mesopotamia, and the various city-states scattered along the coast of Anatolia. These 7 kingdoms were all technically independent, but they interacted frequently through diplomacy, marriage, and war. In fact, their fates were closely intertwined in ways we're only beginning to understand. Take, for example, the Hittite Empire, a collection of states centered in Anatolia. For centuries, they had been locked in conflict with the Egyptians over control of the eastern Mediterranean, but by the 13th century they were allies. The Hittite king and the Egyptian pharaoh exchanged letters, a diplomatic tradition known as a hostage letter, wherein each monarch sent their children to live at the other's court as a guarantee of peace. Meanwhile, down south, the Mycenaeans sailed their sleek ships across the Aegean, carrying raw materials and finished goods from distant lands. Their ships even reached the coast of modern-day Ireland, the furthest known Bronze Age port in Western Europe. But the extent of their empire remains unknown because the Mycenaean civilization collapsed right after writing disappeared. Their language, known as Linear B, was deciphered only in the 1950s, revealing the secrets of their economy, religion, and daily life. Thanks to the Mycenaeans, we learned that the ancient world was far more complex than previously thought. They kept detailed records of their transactions, written in a precursor to the Greek alphabet. One tablet, discovered at the site of Pylos, listed the spoils of war, including 400 pieces of gold, 22 talents of silver, 100 women as slaves, and 7 pairs of gold sandals. Though we now know that there was a Mycenaean king named Agamemnon, thanks to Homer's epic poem, the Iliad, historians are still trying to piece together the details of his reign and the extent of his power. After the collapse, his mighty palace at Mycenae was reduced to a pile of rubble. His capital was burned to the ground, perhaps deliberately, and the civilization he led across the seas vanished into obscurity. What happened to the Mycenaeans is also what happened to the Hittites, the Kassite Empire, and the New Kingdom of Egypt. All four collapsed within a few decades during the second millennium BC. But why? Historians credit a deadly convergence, prolonged drought and famine, internal rebellions, invasions by mysterious sea peoples, and the breakdown of international trade networks that had linked the Mediterranean and Near East in a fragile system of interdependence. At its height, the Late Bronze Age was a globalized world. Egyptian pharaohs exchanged letters and marriages with Hittite kings, while Mycenaean ships carried goods across the Aegean and Mesopotamian merchants recorded trade in cuneiform. But the very networks that bound them together became their weakness. When harvests failed and enemies struck, the shock rippled through the entire system, toppling one kingdom after another. Each state depended on the next to function. But when the wheels of the international trading system broke down, the whole thing collapsed. To better understand how the Late Bronze Age trading system worked, let's focus on the Egyptian Empire. During the reign of Ramesses II, who ruled from 1279 to 1213 BC, Egypt was at the height of its power. Under Ramesses, the Egyptian navy controlled the eastern Mediterranean, enforcing trade along the coast of Syria. On land, well-paved roads connected every important city in the empire, allowing goods to be transported quickly throughout the country. Egypt also controlled access to the Red Sea, a vital trade route connecting the Mediterranean with India and East Africa. From there, merchants could transport goods across the Indian Ocean to India, China, and Southeast Asia. Along the way, they traded raw materials like ivory, gold, and incense for luxury items like textiles and finished metalwork to ensure the safety of these trade routes. The Egyptians maintained a large military force which patrolled the coast and protected caravans traveling across the desert. But Egypt wasn't self-sufficient. While the Nile provided plenty of food, the soil couldn't support large-scale manufacturing. So the Egyptians imported raw materials from other countries like tin from Anatolia, wood from Lebanon, and gold from Nubia. In return, they exported luxury goods like glass, textiles, jewelry, and metalwork. But the Egyptian economy relied heavily on the trade network extending from the Levant to Anatolia. And when the Late Bronze Age trading system collapsed, their economy crumbled. One reason for the demise of the trading system was the ongoing conflict between Egypt and the Hittites. As both empires expanded, they fought a series of wars over control of Syria and Palestine. But it wasn't just warfare that disrupted trade. Natural disasters also played a major role. Between 1200 and 1150 BC, the eastern Mediterranean experienced a period of prolonged drought. In Egypt, the Nile flooded less, meaning less water for drinking, less vegetation for grazing animals, and less grain for eating. The population declined dramatically, leading to social unrest and political instability. Egypt was never fully recovered from the drought. The rulers who came after Ramesses II were less successful, and eventually their empire was conquered by foreign invaders. The collapse of Egypt is also the story of the Hittites, Kassites, and Mycenaeans. Around 1178 BC, the Hittite king Suppiluliuma II sent a letter to the Egyptian pharaoh asking for assistance against a group of raiders known as the Laka. He described how they attacked his cities and stole his treasures and asked the pharaoh to send troops to help him fight back. But the pharaoh never received the letter because the Hittites were already defeated. By 1150 BC, every single Hittite city had been destroyed, and no one knows what happened to their people. Some historians believe they were absorbed by the surrounding cultures, while others suggest they were wiped out by the Lucca, whose origins remain a mystery. What we do know is that the Lucca attacked coastal cities, disrupting trade and laying siege to strongholds of the Kassite Empire. Though the Kassite kings held off the invaders for years, they ultimately lost their grip on Mesopotamia. Around 1155 BC, the last Kassite king was murdered and the empire was plunged into chaos. At the same time, mysterious raiders, known as the Sheeples, were wreaking havoc across the Mediterranean. The exact identity of the Sea Peoples remains unknown, though some scholars suggest they were a confederation of groups from the Aegean and Anatolian coasts. According to ancient Egyptian texts, they arrived in sleek ships armed with bows and arrows, swords and shields. They pillaged along the coast, raiding villages and burning down cities. The Sea Peoples weren't the only ones to blame. Internal strife also contributed to the downfall of the late Bronze Age kingdoms. In Egypt, the rule of the 19th dynasty came to an end as rival pharaohs fought for control. In Anatolia, local governors revolted against the authority of the Hittite kings. In Mesopotamia, the collapse of the Kassite Empire triggered a wave of migrations as entire communities abandoned their homes in search of new lands. Across the Mediterranean, drought, famine, invasion, and civil unrest created a downward spiral that toppled one kingdom after another. And when all of these forces combined, the result was catastrophic. Within a few decades, the wealthiest cities in the world were abandoned. Trade networks collapsed, and the art of writing nearly disappeared. By 1150 BCE, entire civilizations were gone, leaving behind ruins, myths, and fragments of memory. The world entered a dark age where literacy vanished and people reverted to small-scale farming and village life. But out of the ashes came the seeds of renewal. The rise of new cultures like the Greeks, Phoenicians, and Israelites, who would shape the future. The story of the Bronze Age collapse is not only about the fragility of civilization, but also its resilience. It reminds us that interconnected societies are vulnerable to sudden shocks, climate change, migration, economic disruption, just as we are today. The ancient world almost destroyed itself once. The question is, are we prepared to avoid the same fate?